Don't put that in, that was stupid. Hello everyone, right away I want to thank you for coming back to my channel for another video. Today we are talking about one of my favorite things to talk about. We're talking about how fiction works, and more specifically, how narrating works in fiction, and how those ideas can help us in social situations. And right away, I will say this. Maybe you don't care how fiction works, and in response to that, I'll say, fair enough. But my experience with reading and writing has led me to believe that understanding how the art of fiction works, whether that means, literature or TV shows or movies, really any kind of story, can foster the development of a skill or series of skills that are almost universally applicable in any sort of social situation. Understanding the technicalities of storytelling can help us in everyday life because we spend most of our waking hours communicating with or entertaining ourselves with stories. And if you take my word, I'll try to develop a solid case. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so we are talking about narrating in this video. The book that I'm referencing and that I'll be working through in this series is How Fiction Works by James Wood. I think it's a great book for anyone interested in writing fiction or reading fiction. This book can help you kind of get the most out of the stories you experience, be they, again, in books, movies, TV shows, whatever. It's a book I use excerpts from every semester in the reading and writing intensive course that I teach at Johns Hopkins University. And really all of this is to say that I love this book. It's helped me become both a better reader and a better writer. It was a huge help to me early on when I was learning, or first familiarizing myself with the craft. So I definitely recommend for anybody interested in writing fiction or reading fiction, or even, film, I would say pick it up. I recommend it. It's pretty cheap. I want to say it's like $10-ish. But I really do think the book is a necessity for anyone interested in reading great fictional works, which maybe isn't as popular as it once was, but I'm telling you, there's a serious upside to reading fiction. I made a video in the past titled Why Reading Matters, and if this topic interests you at all, I recommend watching the video because the benefits of reading extend far beyond the act of reading itself. Reading is a meta skill that develops our ability to focus. And reading also improves our ability to communicate. I don't care what you read, you should read books you like, books you're interested in. Best case scenario, reading helps you improve your ability to speak. Because what you're doing when you're reading is you're feeding well-constructed sentences and clearly articulated ideas to your brain. And again, this is something I've talked a lot about in other videos. So, if the ideas interest you, I definitely recommend checking them out. I will put the links down below in the description. But I don't want to get too off topic. Today we are talking about narrating in How Fiction Works by James Wood. First of all, when we start thinking about how understanding the way that narration works in a piece of literature can be applicable to everyday life, I mean the way stories are told in fiction can teach us how we can tell better stories, and also how we can absorb more from the stories we spend time with. And I don't just mean with writing fiction, I mean it in the most general sense, with storytelling itself. Reading fiction can teach us how to tell stories, and in my experience, reading it's what you make it. It can be nothing valuable or the most valuable thing in the world, and it can help you, converse in a professional environment or a personal environment or an academic environment, or it can do nothing at all. You can read, your Facebook feed for 5 hours a day and get absolutely nothing out of it except some primitive emotional response. Or you can find works of literature that, really speak to you, that speak to your soul and feel like the way you see and interact with the world is kind of being, constantly recreated by these works. So there's a, wide variety of what reading can do for you. And I think it's all about finding the right books. And the difference between, those two possible outcomes, one where reading is really useful and something that, follows you wherever you go, and the other just angry Facebook reactions, The difference between these two possible outcomes emphasizes the importance of making a conscious effort to get the most out of the time that we spend reading. And obviously, works of fiction can be read without having, a life-changing impact. The point that I'm trying to make is that the information in James Wood's, How Fiction Works can help us get the most out of every work of fiction that we read. So it's optimizing the time we spend reading, and that's why I think it's a great book to spend time with. And I think anyone who has developed a serious reading habit will tell you there are really great books to read. There are great books that are worthy of your time and will, consequently pay you back for the time you spend with them, which is to say that they will, they'll teach you stuff. So make no mistake, reading fiction can teach us in unique ways. And one of the best examples of this, at least in my opinion, is that no other artistic medium allows us to get as close to the people being portrayed as reading literature does. If you think about it, there's always a barrier between the viewer of a work of art and the art itself. A movie, for example, allows us to literally observe the characters in a way we can't when we read a book, for the simple reason that books don't present literal images to us on a screen the way movies or other, visual art, for that matter, does. Now, obviously, cases can be made against this point. I'm only trying to show that one of the unique beauties of reading literature is that we can climb inside the minds of the characters in the story in a way that's objectively closer than some other sort of visual art. And I think this is because when we read literature, the art is being constructed at the level of the word, and that allows us access to the thoughts and the words of the characters in a way that we don't necessarily have when we're watching visual art, an art form that uses images as opposed to language. And an example of what I mean, I guess, is this. We can analyze a character's facial expressions and their mannerisms in a movie, but as far as an objective understanding of their humanity is concerned, nothing can come close to fiction. And I think it's interesting that, in order to come close to fiction or to compete with this sort of interiority that fiction allows for, something that approaches literature has to be employed. A monologue, for example, an employment of language to communicate a specific and particular idea. I say all of this not to make the case that reading literature is somehow objectively better than watching movies. I think a solid case could be made either way. I'm really not trying to get too bogged down. I'm trying to give you some idea of what literature can do uniquely well, because I think that once we understand what literature can do uniquely well, we can optimize the time that we spend with it. And I think that what literature does uniquely well has to do with the way James Wood begins his book. It has to do with the idea of narrating, something I'll talk about in greater detail in the upcoming videos I make on this book, but I just kind of wanted to, give us a kind of a sweeping introduction into the book. For now, I just want to give you some idea of how I think fiction works and why the ways it works make it beautiful. But honestly, it's hard to say how fiction works in a single video. That's why this is going to be a longer series. That's why we're going to, strap in with How Fiction Works by James Wood and just push forward. But why fiction is beautiful, I think I can give you a good idea of what I mean as this video, kind of winds down, comes to a close. Reading fiction brings us closer to people that we can learn from, whether that means the author themselves or the characters in the author's work. Reading fiction has to do, at least most of the time, with people. When we read fiction, we're essentially studying people. And that's a big reason why I think fiction is so beautiful, because it uses language to tell stories rather than, using images to convey a story the way movies do. And I'll say quickly that isn't supposed to be a value judgment. I'm only interested in talking about reading fiction right now and what makes it beautiful and how it can be useful for you. And because of literature's objective dependence on language, the reader can be brought closer to the minds of each person in the story. And I think it's easy to overlook how invaluable that can be. But I'll say one more thing, which I hope will, further convince you if I haven't been able to already. When we read fiction that we care about, that we're interested in, the images the words produce in our head construct what's essentially our own personalized experience of the work itself. Our subconscious generates mental images, and in this way we find ourselves in the works of fiction we read. We find little pieces of our interests and just ourselves more generally in what we read. And I think that's different from basically any other kind of art form, because the art doesn't necessarily exist outside of us. If we think about a book as an artistic instrument, like let's compare it to a piano, let's say, then we, the reader, are the pianist. We play a part in the music making, but the music is personalized to our own experience. And consequently, when we are engrossed by a book, when something sinks its teeth into us, we learn about ourselves. And I think that's beautiful, the ability to, pick up any great work of fiction, and if you're willing to spend the time with it, I mean, obviously pick up a book that engages you, but that you can pick up that book, and no matter where you are in your life, you can learn something from it. You find what is of value to you in the books that most interest you. Okay, so that is everything I've got. But before I go, I just want to thank you, my wonderful viewer, for sticking with me to the end. I also want to thank my video editors, Bach and Joe. I couldn't do this without you guys. I appreciate you. If you found this video interesting or useful or helpful or whatever the right word is, I ask that you please hit the like button and the subscribe button. And let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks everyone, have a great day, and I will see you next time.